Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take a stack of critical sources, pull out the vital insights, and really get straight to the knowledge you need.
That's the plan.
Today, we're taking on something truly indispensable, a journey into a movement that's, well, complex, deeply rooted, and fundamentally shaping the future of global gender justice.
Modern African feminism.
Exactly, modern African feminism. Now, if you're coming to this topic, maybe the first thing that springs to mind is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, "We Should All Be Feminists." It went viral, huge cultural moment.
Undeniably huge, yes.
But here's the crucial thing our sources emphasize. Adichie didn't start this, not by a long shot. She was more like an amplifier.
A powerful amplifier, absolutely, especially for Western audiences. She forced people to listen to this incredible symphony of voices that had actually been building for generations, more than a century, really.
So that's the perfect place to start, right? Our mission today isn't just a summary. We want to unpack how African feminism is this rich tapestry of perspectives.
Exactly. And how it weaves together that history, the anti-colonial struggle, with today's fight for gender justice. It's about specific challenges, those intersecting challenges on the continent, but also celebrating the agency, the intellectual work.
Okay, so let's tackle the biggest elephant in the room right away, this persistent idea. Is this movement just a Western import?
That one. Yeah, it comes up a lot, but it's just... historically, it's inaccurate, and frankly, it kind of dismisses centuries of actual struggle by African women.
Right.
The reality, deep down, is that long before the word feminism even arrived or was widely used, you had women across Africa who were leaders, who were fighters in resistance movements, pillars of their communities. This isn't an imitation game. It's an organic evolution, indigenous struggles for justice that were there way before colonialism.
And you can see that so clearly in the historical record. You mentioned leaders.
Yeah.
Think about someone like Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, Nigeria, mid-20th century.
Oh, Kuti is absolutely essential. She embodies how gender and political liberation were just inseparable for many. She wasn't just focused on rights at home.
No, she was leading massive marches
Yeah.
against colonial taxes.
Exactly. And championing women's political education, holding both colonial and traditional authorities to account. She was fighting on, like, two fronts at the same time. It wasn't either.
And then there's Albertina Sisulu in South Africa, a giant of the anti-apartheid movement. Her work deeply intertwined national liberation with empowering women.
Absolutely. Another powerful example of that synthesis. It wasn't just about fighting the state. It was about building a more just society within the struggle itself.
And this resistance, it wasn't only physical or political organizing. There's a really strong intellectual and literary tradition, too, especially if we look at Francophone Africa. That's where you see the movement really establishing its distinct voice, right?
Yeah. Precisely. You absolutely have to look at the writers. Take Mariama Bâ's novel, So Long a Letter. Came out of Senegal in 1981. It's fiction, but it powerfully explores the real emotional social costs of patriarchy, of polygamy on women's lives.
And that book resonated globally, didn't it? Became a kind of touchstone.
It really did. A profound critique of traditional male power structures shared through storytelling.
And then even earlier, Awatayam's La Parole Négresse from Mali, 1978. That seems like a really foundational text for intellectual independence.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Tang's work is key because she did two things simultaneously. She critiqued African patriarchal systems and she directly challenged Western feminist assumptions.
So she was saying, hold on, your experience isn't universal.
Exactly. She was essentially saying, you can't speak for us, your frameworks don't capture our reality. This whole intellectual history, Bâ, Tayam, and others, it's definitive proof. The movement generates its own critical theory. It always has.
That makes perfect sense. If the history is distinct, the theory has to be distinct too. So, okay, let's dig into that theoretical core. If this isn't a Western import, what are the unique foundational pillars? Our sources seem to point towards three main themes.
Yeah, three themes really define its distinctiveness. The first one is absolutely critical, and it shapes everything politically: intersectionality as a lived reality.
Okay, intersectionality. We hear that term a lot now, but what does it mean specifically here?
Well, for African feminists, this isn't just an academic concept you discuss in a seminar. It's the actual daily lived condition of oppression. You simply cannot separate gender oppression from race, from class, from ethnicity, and critically, from the ongoing legacy of colonialism. They're all tangled together.
So it forces a different set of priorities compared to, say, maybe some earlier Western feminist movements that sometimes centered on the experiences of white middle-class women. Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about fighting against patriarchal inheritance laws in a rural community. For an African feminist perspective, that's not just about a woman's right to property in isolation.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally a fight for economic justice, for land rights, which is completely tied up with post-colonial land distribution, global economic structures. It's about survival in a system that's structurally disadvantaged.
So the experience of a poor rural woman and an urban elite woman are vastly different, but connected by these larger systems.
Exactly. The movement has to address both, because their challenges, though different on the surface, are rooted in the same intersecting systems of injustice.
Okay, that's clear. What's the second theme? The sources highlight a strong communal focus, community over individual.
Yes. This is a really interesting philosophical distinction. While individual rights are definitely important, there's often a stronger emphasis on collective well-being, collective liberation.
Which can feel quite different from the strong emphasis on individualism that has sometimes characterized Western movements.
It's deeply rooted in many indigenous philosophies. Think of the concept of Ubuntu, especially prominent in Southern Africa. The core idea is often translated as, I am because we are.
I am because we are.
Yeah. The thinking is that true freedom, genuine liberation, has to be collective. If injustice harms one person, the entire community is diminished. Freedom isn't just an individual achievement, it's a shared state.
I understand the philosophical appeal of that.
Mm.
But practically, is there a risk that prioritizing the collective might sometimes allow individual rights to get sidelined, especially in societies where community norms might still be heavily influenced by patriarchal structures?
That's a very real tension, and it's something activists constantly navigate. It's a constant balancing act. However, the ideal within something like Ubuntu is that successful change must benefit the whole community.
So it's not just about getting one woman into a position of power, for example.
Right. It pushes for outcomes like better health for everyone, better schools for all the children, improved infrastructure for the village. It forces a kind of radical inclusion in the political goals, ideally. The aim is collective upliftment.
Got it. Okay, theme number 3 brings us back to that intellectual independence.
Yeah.
Decolonizing gender and knowledge.
Yes, this is a massive ongoing project. It's about reclaiming history and challenging present-day assumptions about gender.
How does that work in practice?
Well, a big part is challenging patriarchal norms that are often presented as authentically African, as if they've existed forever.
Well, haven't they?
Not always in their current form. Research shows many of these norms were actually strengthened, distorted, or sometimes even practically invented by colonial administrations.
How so?
Colonial rulers often preferred to deal with centralized male leaders or chiefs. It was simpler for them administratively, and in doing so, they often sidelined or completely ignored existing parallel power structures that women held, things like councils of women elders, queen mothers, market women's associations.
So colonialism, in some cases, actually entrenched patriarchy further or reshaped it, and then it got labeled tradition.
Exactly. So decolonizing gender means excavating that history. It means reclaiming the pre-colonial stories and evidence of powerful women, spiritual leaders, political figures, economic forces, to show that female leadership and agency are not foreign concepts imported from elsewhere. They're indigenous.
It's about correcting the historical record, basically. Proving women's power is authentically African.
Precisely. And this intellectual work, this reclaiming, has led to the creation of specific indigenous feminist frameworks, models born out of African experiences and philosophies.
This is where the movement really shows its theoretical depth.
Absolutely. It's generating its own sophisticated critical theory.
Let's touch on 2 key examples mentioned in the sources. First, there's Stiwanism, coined by Mariama Bâ. It stands for social transformation, including women in Africa.
Right. And the key words there are social transformation. Stiwanism isn't just about adding women into the existing system and stirring.
It's not just about leaning in to the current structure.
Not at all. It argues the entire social structure needs to be fundamentally reimagined and rebuilt because it's flawed at its core, built on those unjust colonial and patriarchal legacies we talked about. That insistence on holistic societal change is what makes it really distinct.
And the other example is motherism, proposed by Catherine of Colonna. Now, that term, it could sound quite conservative to some ears.
It could on the surface, but it's actually quite complex. Motherism doesn't necessarily reject traditional roles like motherhood out of hand. Instead, it tries to reframe them.
Oh.
It views those roles, particularly motherhood and the idea of nurturance, not as inherently limiting, but as potential sources of significant power, wisdom, and moral authority.
So leveraging culturally respected rules for change.
Kind of. It's arguing women can use the respect and influence associated with these roles to push for societal and political transformation. It's an attempt to define and wield power using existing indigenous moral or social structures rather than feeling obligated to adopt entirely different language or frameworks.
Interesting. So these models, Stiwanism, Motherism, they really demonstrate a movement that's philosophically mature, creating its own tools.
Completely self-sufficient, intellectually speaking.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's bring it to the present day. We've talked about the historical roots, the intellectual foundations. What about contemporary activism? The digital age seems to have played a huge role.
Oh, undoubtedly. Social media has become this incredibly powerful tool. A global microphone, really, for mobilization, for holding power accountable.
We've seen some massive examples. Hashtag activism that really broke through globally.
Absolutely. Think about hashtag #BringBackOurGirls in Nigeria. That put immense international pressure on the government. Or hashtag total shutdown in South Africa that took local nationwide protests against gender-based violence and made them visible on a global scale.
And it's not just the huge campaigns, is it? Digital spaces are also fostering connections for more everyday struggles.
Definitely. Things like the hashtag Being Female in Nigeria campaign, it created this vital online space for women just to share their daily experiences of sexism, microaggressions, harassment.
Building solidarity.
Exactly. Breaking down that isolation that patriarchy thrives on. Connecting women across cities, across countries who might be facing similar things.
But as this online and offline mobilization grows, there's pushback.
Right?
The sources talk about significant backlash.
It's fierce. Activists are constantly being labeled un-African or Western puppets, or accused of importing moral degeneracy simply for challenging norms about gender and sexuality that are deeply entrenched. The personal risks can be incredibly high.
And that condemnation can happen even when activists are getting recognition internationally. The example of Zanele Muholi in South Africa is striking.
Yes, Muholi's photographic work documenting Black queer lives is internationally acclaimed. Major awards, exhibitions.
But at home.
But faces serious condemnation from some quarters for supposedly promoting Western degeneracy. It perfectly illustrates that tension around decolonizing gender playing out right now. Who gets to define what's culturally authentic? Whose lives are deemed acceptable to represent?
It's a real battleground.
It is. And amidst this, we need to remember the nature of the organizing today. It's often highly decentralized, very pragmatic, focused on tangible results.
And really trying to center all voices, not just the most prominent ones.
Crucially important, making sure queer women, women with disabilities, women from marginalized ethnic groups are heard. You also have distinct regional focuses, like North African activists pushing for reforms in family law, or grassroots organizers in East Africa working on land rights and local governance.
And that pragmatism, that focus on real-world impact, we saw that with groups like the Feminist Coalition in Nigeria during the hashtag #EndSARS protests in 2020.
Yes, they played such a crucial practical role, organizing funds, legal aid, support for the protesters. It showed clearly how gender advocacy is inseparable from broader human rights, anti-corruption, and youth movements.
It's all connected.
And that grassroots energy is everywhere. Figures like Njeri Mwangi in Kenya organizing protests focused on very specific local issues like land rights. It's vibrant, it's diverse, it's focused on making material changes in people's lives.
So looking at all this, the history, the theory, the activism today, what's the takeaway for the future? The sources suggest this isn't just about critique anymore.
No, it's far beyond just critique. It's actively building what comes next. You see it everywhere.
Like youth challenging Eurocentric beauty standards online, on blogs and social media.
Exactly. Or women in North Africa battling for modernized legal codes that grant equal rights in marriage and divorce.
Or, as you mentioned, grandmothers in rural Kenya organizing to fight for their land rights against corporate or state encroachment. It's happening at all levels.
So the final analysis really is, this is an indispensable movement. It is shaping the architecture of global gender justice. The question isn't if African feminism will shape the future. That's already happening.
So the real question is for others.
The real question, especially for potential global allies, is will you engage respectfully? Will you stand alongside as co-creators in this future, offering resources and solidarity on their terms? Or will this incredibly rich intellectual and activist movement continue to be treated as sort of a footnote or an afterthought in global conversations?
And the answer to that will have huge implications.
It will define the potential success of gender justice everywhere, I think.
That's a powerful challenge, which leads to a final thought for you, our listener. If we take those core ideas we discussed, like Stiwanism's focus on deep social transformation, not just inclusion, and Ubuntu's emphasis on collective well-being.
I am because we are.
Right. How might applying that kind of collective freedom lens change how you think about struggles for justice, right, in your own community, wherever you are?
Yeah.
What shifts when the focus moves from just what do I need to what do we need to be free together?
Something to definitely think about.
Something to think about long after this deep dive.